Good evening and welcome to the Commack Council of PTAs Meet the Candidates Night. I am Nicole Perez, President of Council, and on behalf of myself and my executive board, I thank you for tuning into this event. Tonight's forum will be moderated by Council. I will serve as moderator and Diana Michelle will be the timekeeper. I thank the community for submitting questions in advance, and I thank my council officers and chairs for all their help putting this together. I'd like to present the candidates. The incumbent, Mr. Jarrett Behar and Mr. Gus Huber, are running for a 3-year seat on the Commack Board of Education. I thank you, Mr. Huber and Mr. Behar, for participating in this event and allowing us to ask questions important to the community so that we may be informed voters on May 18th. About tonight's format, each candidate will be allowed 3 minutes to make a presentation stating qualifications and reasons for running. Then I will proceed with the questions. Each candidate will be given 1 minute to answer each question. No rebuttals are allowed during the question and answer period. This is not a debate format. Finally, each candidate will be allowed 2 minutes to make a closing statement after the last question has been answered. Candidates may use their closing remarks to make rebuttals if they wish. Opening presentations will be in alphabetical order. Closing statements will be in reverse order. I will do my best to alternate who gets to answer a question first. The candidates were not advised of our questions ahead of time. Let's get started. Mr. Behar, you have 3 minutes to provide opening remarks.
My name is Jarrett Behar, and I'm running for re-election to the Commack Board of Education. I've lived in Commack for 15 years, and I currently have 2 children, Molly in 4th grade and Jeffrey in 8th grade. I am involved. I've coached sports, Little League, basketball since my son first started T-ball over at Wicks Park. I've been the budget representative and PTA treasurer at Rolling Hills. I was co-chair of the budget committee for PTA Council, and I've been on the executive board of the Commack Coalition of Caring for 5 years. I'm in my 6th year as a board member. I've served on numerous committees, the Safety and Security Committee, co-chair of the Anti-Vaping Task Force. As chair of the Marion Carl Property Committee, I was honored to work with the first group that was able to produce a viable and exciting plan for the property. LIU has invested over $2 million in cleanup and improvements for that property, turning it from a taxpayer burden into something that generates income and will provide unique educational opportunities for our students. Over this last decade of deep community involvement, I have spent a significant time listening to our neighbors who I proudly represent. So I understand the concerns from all corners of Commack. With 2 young children, I am completely invested in this process. This past year, dealing with the pandemic has been difficult, and I will admit that it was not perfect. There was no way that it was ever going to be. Remember, in July and August, experts weren't sure we would make it past Columbus Day with children in the buildings. Our first priority was safety. Everyone made sacrifices to keep the spread low, and we succeeded in keeping our children and our vulnerable family members at home safe. We are moving forward towards a full opening next year with significant mental health and academic support to ease the transition. I am proud that we could do that while also setting a historically low tax increase. I am always open to listening to different ideas and perspectives. When we hold space for difference, we grow. I also strongly believe that actions speak louder than words. When the parents came to the board meeting to inform us of problems with the quarantine program, I asked tough questions and helped initiate change. When our seniors came to our board meeting and broke our hearts describing a lost year, the board directed action and it took place. More activities, a full class graduation at Stony Brook, a full class prom, just to name a few. Our students will always come first. Now, I don't know Mr. Huber. I've never met him in person, and I've actually never seen him before tonight. But I'm guessing that even though his children has graduated, he is going to spend some time telling us what we could have done differently this year. Those suggestions would have been more helpful during the year when we could have had a discussion about them and potentially used them in some way. This job is about time, being present, rolling up your sleeves and putting in the work. The pandemic is approaching its end. Hopefully we never experience something like this again, but telling us what we could have done differently on May 4th does us no good. At this point, we need to move forward. This district needs a board member with a proven track record of community involvement, action, and results. And I strongly believe that I am that person. I am here for my children and my neighbors' children and the children of this community. Thank you very much.
Mr. Huber, you have 3 minutes.
Sure. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Gus Huber, and I actually grew up 5 miles from here. I'm a graduate of Harborfields High School, so I'm a lifelong Long Islander. My wife and I, Julie, we moved here about 22 years ago. I'm familiar with Commack growing up, and I raised my 3 kids in the Commack Public Schools, K through 12. My youngest graduated last year. She's at Quinnipiac. My oldest is graduating from Marist, and my son in the middle there is a junior in Binghamton. So I think the Commack schools have always been wonderful. They provided my children with a great education and a real readiness for college. So I've always been a fan of Commack schools. I've also been a fan of the community. My family, we've been involved with a lot in the community, whether it be when there were little fundraisers or charity events through the school with food drives, clothing drives, Girl Scouts, coaching Little League, coaching Christ the King basketball, PAL football, class mom. We've been involved. We love the community. We love the schools, the teaching staff, the administration. I don't have issues. I'm not here to be an anti-school, anti-budget, tax pact type of candidate. I'm not even anti Mr. Bihar. I don't know the man. So I'm not running against anybody. I am running for me, and I am running for improvement of the school system. COVID was something that I think was hard for everybody. I was a school psychologist for 12 years. I'm currently a building principal out in Three Village, and that was since 2003. I presently am a principal of an alternative high school in Three Village. That's for like socially and emotionally challenged children who really don't fit a traditional setting. We open 5 days a week. We're very comparable to Commack. We have 5 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and a high school, 1-level high school. So there was an investment there. There's planning there, and the leadership and board and the teachers union worked together, and they created a wonderful plan. I was disappointed in Commack. I was disappointed in what they gave, and through the year, I learned more and more from friends of ours who still have children in the building. But I actually got a flavor of it myself at the end of last year when my senior had to sit home, like every other senior. Instruction started late, really late. We sent home stuff on that Friday, March 13th, with elementary school students, packets of ELA and math to get them through 2 weeks until the teachers set up the Google Classroom. We also had all of our teachers ready for Google Classroom and Chromebooks distributed before we went out. Commack was a little delayed. So I don't know if it was poor planning, limited insight, whatever it might have been. But that seems to have perseverated through the year. As an educator, and yes, May 4th, I'm not telling what you did wrong. I'm just saying that through the year, we all have been saying what's wrong. And parents have been before the board for many times, and nothing really changed because it was a static plan, and the plan never moved forward. And I think a voice of an educator on the board, more educators on the board, would help direct the school in a healthy direction.
Thank you. I'm going to now start the questions. Mr. Huber, you'll answer first. You have 1 minute. What school or district activities have you been involved in, and how much time can you devote to board service?
I can fully devote my time to board service. School activities, I'm usually consumed by my own schools, but school activities here, again, coaching, raising my own children, and that kind of stuff. That was pretty much, I trust the school system. I never had a reason to question the school system. My kids got a great education. Teachers were great. We communicated regularly. So I never really had to be that involved with the school system. I had a lot of trust.
Mr. Bihar, sorry.
No problem. Thank you. I'm going to try to fit this all in a minute. So between 2012 and 2015, I was the Rolling Hills PTA budget representative. 2013 to 2015, I was the PTA treasurer. I was the co-chair of the PTA Council Budget Committee for 2 years between 2014 and 2015. I managed Commack South Little League from 2012 to 2015. I coached basketball at Dix Hills and Christ the King 2015 through 2021. I am the executive board member, one of the executive board members of the Commack Coalition of Caring, which helps to fight addiction in the community since 2016. I was the chair of the Marion Carl Farm Committee from 2017 to 2019. I am the co-chair of the Anti-Vaping Task Force 2019 to present. I've been a trustee since 2015 and the vice president of the board since 2017. I attend every board meeting, almost every PTA council meeting. I try to get to some of the unit PTA meetings, and I ran out of time. There's a lot of other stuff too. Thank you.
Question 2, what do you see as the main responsibility and role of a school board member, and what attributes are essential for successful school board members? Mr. Bihar, you can go.
Well, the main role of the board member is the oversight capacity of the superintendent and the administration. And really, as a board member, you have to be able to go out into the community and learn what the community wants, bring that back to the administration and the superintendent and advocate on behalf of the community. That's really the main role of the board member. We're not actually making the curriculum decisions on behalf of the schools. So I think that maybe this concept that we need educators on the board is a little bit overstated. My career as a lawyer, I'm actually able to deal with clients. In this case, my client is the community, and then I advocate to the administration and the superintendent to make changes that the community wants to see. And I think we've done that very effectively. Just this past year, when they came and they said, the parents said that the quarantine program wasn't working, I asked tough questions at that meeting and we got that changed immediately.
Mr. Huber?
Sure. And again, Mr. Bihar has a wonderful resume and I can't take that away from him. What a lot of board members don't have, including Mr. Bihar, is insight and experience working intimately in schools themselves. So a plan such as the Commack model, if you were a savvy education person, you would understand that it had flaws going into the plan. You wouldn't have to wait for crowds of people to come and tell you to improve it. You should have anticipated that the quarantine plan of kids sitting home with 2 hours a week of pre-recorded lessons not connected to their classes was a huge fault. You should not have allowed that to happen from the get-go. And again, as an educator, as a father, I wouldn't have allowed it for my kid, so I wouldn't allow it for someone else's kid. That's always been my rule. I would never sell the community something that I myself wouldn't want for my own child, or that I as a parent wouldn't be satisfied with. And somehow that got lost. And again, there should be a checks and balance. You have educated professionals, leadership on the inside, telling you as a board what you should be doing, yet there doesn't seem to be a questioning insight to kind of check and balance that. So we just have to take it at word. Yes, you're a lawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. Thank you.
We have to move on, I'm sorry. Question 3, what will be your top 2 priorities for our district to address during your tenure, Mr. Huber?
Top 2 priorities. The first one would be getting back to normal. I think there will be gaps in education. I think there will be tremendous concern about the social and emotional development of children, particularly middle school ages. I worked in middle school for 10 years. The primary issue for those children is social development. And they've been locked down for a year and a little bit more than a year. So I think that's a big part of opening schools and providing opportunities for them to get re-involved, not just academics, not just bar charts and data points that have been presented over and over at the board. And again, I think some mom had said it before, like, my kid isn't a data point. And again, I don't even know how statistically significant some of those bar graphs are, but if I were a parent after this pandemic, I wouldn't be worried about the grades so much. I'd be worried about my child's well-being and integrating back in the system. And I think that's what we have to spearhead.
Okay. Mr. Bihar?
Well, I would say the top priority, and this is something that we've discussed at previous board meetings, is transitioning the children back to full-time schooling. And that's both from a mental health perspective and an education perspective. So first of all, we have students in the secondary level that are now not used to going to school every day. We have our elementary students who are going to school every day, but it's in a different environment. They're in smaller classrooms. The class sizes are necessarily going to double. So we really need to make sure that we're handling the children who all have unique needs very carefully and be there to support their mental health. And we have that in place already, not just through the summer programs, but we're ready to support them when they get back with counseling if they need it, and with tutoring, making sure that that tutoring is available to all our students, regardless of their activities. And the second one is to continue the district's fiscally responsible path. Something that we've done over the last few years is keep the tax levies very low, and we'll continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 4, and bear with me, it's a couple of sentence lead up. PTA hears a lot from parent members who seek district testing and diagnosis for special ed services, but are denied by the district and have to go outside the district to get their child independently diagnosed in order to get the services their children need. This takes significant time and results in supports being withheld or delayed if and until families get that outside help. We also hear about parents who have to fight to continue the supports that do help their children. What can the district do to support students who have or need individualized education programs, IEPs, 504 plans, or English as a new language services? Mr. Bihar?
That's a great question. And ironically, I actually had a long conversation with a community member who's very involved with the special education community about this exact topic today. We spent about an hour on the phone, and she was explaining to me the trouble that some parents have, as you described, getting the services that they need. What I did is I've already reached out to Dr. James, and the three of us are going to sit down and we're going to talk about the concerns that are in the community and how we can improve it and how we can better provide access for those services for the children in our district. And I think that that's something that I've historically done over the last 6 years. I myself, with my 2 children, aren't in that world, but I know plenty of people in the community from all different corners that have different needs in Commack, and I'm able to talk to those people, understand those concerns, and bring them into the district so that we can address them in a very expeditious and effective manner.
Mr. Huber?
Sure. So again, I've worked with special education committees for many, many years, and special education students and parents as well. So the concerns of the parents shouldn't be a surprise to the district. We have a very savvy parent population here in Commack. I don't know the responsiveness of the special education department to parent concerns. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's arguments about what services to put in place, what services the district should provide. But again, I don't think we should be surprised that some of the parents are concerned about the lack of services. From what I heard from people in the community over the last few weeks is that some of those very services weren't even provided in the model, the Commack model, the gold standard model that was rolled out. And that's shameful. Those children of all children should be serviced, and parents are knowledgeable and they're a great resource. And I think we need to listen to them as board members. And again, with an intimate knowledge of CSEs and services and continuums of services and the laws that govern that, I
Thank
think
you, Mr. Huber.
some great insight. Thank you.
Question 5, what should the district do to support students who need extra help but who do not qualify for the 504 plans or IEPs? Mr. Huber?
Academic help you're talking about?
What should they do to support them academically or otherwise?
Okay, so I would think part of the teacher's agreement with the district is providing help outside of the classroom. They have their 5 periods, their prep, their lunch. I believe most contracts also make provisions for providing extra help. There are different centers that schools can set up for extra help with reading or writing. And those are non-special education services that I think a school with the caliber of Commack would have already built in to their programs.
Thank you. Mr. Bihar?
Well, I think that anyone that's attended the last few board meetings would know that this is something, even as I just said, we've already put into process. So next year, especially as we transition back to full time, we're going to have tutoring in place before school, after school, in the evening for our children that play sports. There is going to be the second half of the summer. There's going to be a whole opportunity for academic, both enrichment and reintegration for anyone that wants it at no cost using the federal grant funds that we've recently received. So we have all of these great supports already in place. And the best part is it's at no cost to the taxpayer. So we're really taking into account what happened during the course of this year. And we're going to move that forward with a significant amount of supports that, as I mentioned, were very clearly described over the last few board meetings. Thank you.
Okay. Question 6. In the community, there has been much discussion on adding board seats. What do you feel are the pros and cons to having a larger board, and where do you stand on having a larger board? Mr. Bihar?
Well, not everything is all cons. So obviously, having more community input in a vacuum would be a good thing. And that's something that we always strive for. In the 6 years that I've been on the board, we've had 3 uncontested elections and 0 three-way races. And so what that highlights is just a problem in getting people involved with the board. And there's a reason for that. It's a lot of work. I'm going to be honest with you. It is a significant amount of work. I show up for a board meeting for executive session at 6 o'clock at night after I've worked a full day. And then sometimes I don't get out till 11 p.m. midnight. And that's just the board meetings. That's not the calls, being out in the community, everything else. So it's hard to find people that are willing to put that level of commitment in, and that also are really only doing it because they care about the community, right? Not just because they want to lower taxes or they have some single issue that they're concerned about. So my concern would be, if we increase the size of the board, are we going to find 7 good people who want to put all that time in and really care about our community?
Mr. Huber?
Again, pros and cons on both sides of it. I think most schools on Long Island have a size of Commack would have a 7-member board. One of the cons of that would be you can kind of prevent this triangulation of a 3-2 kind of margin. When you have 7 people trying to work together collegially, I just think there's more of a generation of ideas and direction that people can grasp. 5 works at Commack. Listen, when Commack's good, a 5-member board works. Commack's a great district. It can run itself. Like they talk about building a plane while we're flying it. That plane has been built for years. Commack is a good flying plane. You don't need a lot of work to make Commack great. You can roll over a lot of decisions, a lot of programs, a lot of services, a lot of supports to make it work. So it works. What happened was, when it's not working, it just seemed like, okay, here was a real test. And in many people's opinion, it failed. So perhaps having more members on the board who aren't used to sitting there taking an easier way. I'm not saying it's easy at all, Jared. I'm saying it's a lot of time, it's a lot of commitment.
Thank you,
but it's
Mr. Huber.
much easier when things are rolling and doing well.
Next question. Have you ever been involved in contract negotiations, which is a crucial role for a board member? And what is or would be your approach to negotiations as a school board member? Mr. Huber?
Directly involved, no. Tangentially involved, yes, for administrators' contracts and teachers' contracts. Looking at what's working, looking at items that may need to be tweaked, understanding the needs of the bargaining unit. In this case, it could be the administrators' unit or the teachers' union. The key element, of course, is open dialogue. It cannot be an us against them. It has to be an embracing and a recognition that, together, that's what makes the district move in a right direction. That is what makes the district have a unified sense of working with children, reaching parents, etc. So if that is controversial, and if you are one that is going to kind of instill conflict in that process, it's going to divide the district in many, many ways, because there are very pro education people, and there are some that are not so pro. Contracts are probably the biggest budget item in any budget. And in bad times, that's a hard thing to deal with, but it is a people industry. And as long as you take care of the people in the industry, it becomes a great product.
Thank you. Mr. Bihar?
So in my 6 years on the board, I've been involved in numerous contract negotiations with all the bargaining units. The teachers union, CASA, groundskeepers, secretarial union. I will say that when I first got on the board, there was a difficult relationship between the administration and the teachers union. And that was one of my priorities, was to make that relationship smoother, to open up the lines of communication. And people that came to board meetings back then will know the teachers came in, they were upset. It was not a great relationship. We've worked very hard, and now I'm proud to say that we have a great relationship with the teachers union. I'm proud to say that every time I've run for the board so far, and we'll see what happens this year, I've been endorsed by the teachers union. So I have a long history of building relationships, being involved in those contract negotiations, and getting them done in a way that creates great working conditions for the teachers, but also has fiscal responsibility for the members of our community.
Thank you. Next question. How would you balance any competing views of district administration, teachers, and other unions and Commack families when disagreements occur? Mr. Bihar?
Well, look, that's what you have to do. You have to be out in the community, talking to people and understanding not just what their problems are, but what motivates those problems, what's behind those problems. And I'll tell you, this is the biggest danger that we run into. You can't just rely on social media for what's going on in this community. You have to be able to understand what really is going on in our community. But I will tell you that the number one thing that you have to take into account is that the kids have to come first. And at the end of the day, the members of the community and the members of our administration and our superintendent and the board, our priority is the kids. So what you have to do is understand the community has a problem. They want what's best for the kids. The administration is looking at it and they're saying, we want to do what's right for the kids too. So how do you marry those two things together? And ultimately, when you come to that fundamental purpose, you realize that you can find a common solution because everyone is on the same team.
Thank you. Mr. Huber?
Again, as a board member, I think you set the tone and you set the culture of a district, and it is through leadership. It can't be open arguments. It can't be name calling and disrespectful opinions being voiced. It can't be an us against them kind of mentality. Prior to tonight, I was out in the community. I had a little meet and greet in Hoyt Farms, where some families came out and listened to some concerns. I did the same at Cedar Road Park recently for some families to come out. It's my style. It's my nature. It's what I do for a living for 34 years. That's how, again, the district is only as good as the people are. That's kids, that is families, that is administrators, and that is teachers. I used to have and more importantly, the teachers, because I used to have a professor that told me basically, as someone in charge of a school, whether board or administrator, if you don't feed the teachers, they eat the kids. So it is a trickle down type of mentality. But if people are not happy, and that seems to be what's happening right now, it doesn't matter about your previous experience. Recently read the book of Now, The Importance of Now.
Thank you, Mr. Huber.
What you do now is important.
Thank you. Next question. What do you believe is PTA's relationship with the Board of Ed? And is there anything that you would change about that relationship? Mr. Huber?
PTAs, again, they're the big communicators in the district. They are insightful. Not only do you go out in the community, but they bring stuff to you as well. And again, they're a wonderful resource. They're passionate about being involved with schools. They provide wonderful opportunities to help subsidize what schools don't do. Again, they're a connecting force. Schools are the hub of the community. Always should be, always have been, in my opinion. They have to be that. The PTAs are those kind of satellites that help make it a more full experience for all of us, for the families, for the children, and for the building at large. And again, you have to have open communication and support for those people.
Thank you. Mr. Bihar?
I mean, the greatest thing about the PTA is it starts with the kids, right? I mean, that's their parents and their teachers, and their parents working with the teachers for the children. And literally, there's nothing I would change about that relationship. I mean, it's, as an active member of the PTA, as someone who cut my teeth in the PTA before I got involved with the board, it was just an invaluable experience. You're working with your fellow parents. And last night at PTA Council, I thanked the PTA because they give us feedback from the community, but they're also the conduit to go back to the parents. And I'll go to it again in you see misinformation on social media. People tend to conflate a few people complaining about something with the entire community. But the district is able to talk with the PTA. The PTA then gets that information, true factual information, out in the community. I mean, when it boils down to it, the PTA is the heart of this community, and really the lifeblood. And there's nothing I'd change about that relationship.
Thank you. What is the Board of Ed's role vis-a-vis the superintendent? And please describe what a system of checks and balances with respect to the superintendent and BOE relationship looks like. Mr. Bihar?
Well, the board's primary role is oversight of the superintendent. That's basically where the board starts. And what we do is we're the ones that are out in the community. I mean, this is a different kind of place because the superintendent lives in the community, but we're out there talking to everyone. And when we hear that the community as a whole has a problem with something, we discuss it with the superintendent, and we talk about how can we make changes to make the community happier with what's going on in the district. Now, the difficulty arises is that sometimes you have a group of people that are upset, but it's not the majority of the community. And that's what you have to decide when you're dealing with the superintendent. Am I dealing with a wholesale community problem where we really need to change the system? Or is this a smaller group that still deserves and needs attention and needs to have their problems met? But, you know, do we bring him to the table to give them a more individualized resolution to their issue? And that is really the most difficult part of being on the board and dealing with the superintendent, is understanding that dichotomy. Thank you.
Mr. Huber?
Yeah, sure. I don't think the role of the Board of Education is to micromanage any school system. That is the role of the superintendent and his administrative team. I would look as a board member to see what type of process they have in the buildings for dealing with issues, what type of teams are being developed. I would ask some really important questions if I felt like it was fairly nebulous, or perhaps, you know, listening to people on the outside. They may be few, that's true, but it's still not, you know, sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire, and there's a lot of people in the community, and again, over the past few weeks, who are afraid to speak up. So the proud few and the brave few that go to board meetings, that will call, that will send an email on, they usually represent more than just those few. So I would probably test the waters with any superintendent. There has to be a checks and balance. You have to ask the hard questions. You should have data presented to you. You should be able to say, how about we go back and bring stuff back to us? That's the charge that you can give a superintendent and the administrative team, for that matter. Do you do it yourself? No, but you have to take it as important and pass it on and expect some accountability back.
Thank you. Next question. Many community members have been frustrated by board policies that limit communication, especially during BOE meetings. Do you support changing from the current process of filling out a card and waiting an answer at a later date to having questions answered at the meeting? Mr. Huber?
Okay, it's funny because that was the most glaring thing. Mr. Bihar reads that announcement, and it's almost like it's subtle, but it's almost as if you box them in so that they cannot make comments about things that they were there for. And it's funny that the agenda in the beginning dictates what comments are. And I understand people want to go home and make a bit, but these people leave their homes, their children, their spouses to come out for a night and have the courage, again, like I said before, to go before a board and speak. And yet often they're weighted to the very end. And again, some of the snarkiness and some of the disrespectful comments. One was, you know, your hyperbole is tiresome. One was, you're glad I gave you the opportunity to speak tonight. Like, those things don't have places in there. So the public participation, again, it's invited by the board. It should be welcoming by the board. It should not be intimidating. It should not be put, you know, as a last alternative. It should be embraced. These are people in the community you're supposed to serve and listen to. And again, during the pandemic, you could have made some modifications.
Thank you. Mr. Bihar?
Yeah, you know, this is something that's, I think, hard for Mr. Huber to actually comment on because he has never been to a board meeting. But I think when you're there and you're listening to everything, it's hard for us to give answers off the tops of our head. And the one thing that we want to do is we want to give people accurate answers and information. We want to hear their concerns. And we've certainly, and I have certainly solicited questions ahead of time before the board meeting so that we can then have prepared answers and answer them at the meeting. And a lot of times people have done that and their questions have been answered at the meeting or answered ahead of time via email. It's hard when people especially answer very specific questions at the meeting to be able to just give an answer. And then you run into a problem where if I'm answering the easy questions, but I'm not answering the specific questions, people feel like, why are you talking to that person, but you're not talking to me? Personally, I think that putting the question on the card gives us an ability to keep track of it, to make sure that it's answered and to make sure that it's answered completely. Because at the end of the day, the community deserves answers and they should get complete ones.
Thank you. Next question. What would you do to improve transparency about board decisions, policies, and district information? And how would you improve communication between community members and the board about those things? Mr. Bihar?
I have to say that in the 6 years that I've been on the board, one of my main focuses has been on how can the district better communicate with the community members, right? So we've implemented a system where there's emails and there's text. Sometimes people tell me it's too much. I get too many text messages. I get too many emails. This year, we've tried to reach out to people through videos. I will say that the agenda is published ahead of time. And I have encouraged people all the time, please look at the agenda, send in your questions ahead of time, just like I previously mentioned, and we will answer them. Anyone that emails me a question, I make sure that they get an answer. People call me all the time. If I don't have an answer, I get an answer and I follow up with them. I am the representative of the community. My email address is published on the Commack District website, and I always tell people, please come talk to me. That's what I'm here for. I want to make sure you get the answers to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Huber?
Listen, and again, you could say I haven't been in a board meeting or worked on the board at Commack. I've been in more board meetings and made more board presentations in my career than Mr. Bihar could have ever claimed. So the fact that you could portray me as a novice in this field, far from it. Answering the questions, and again, I had one question. My kids have a total of 39 years in Commack. I had one question over the summer. My email was unanswered for over 2 weeks. And I believe, Mr. Bihar, you probably got the second response to that. It was simply as opening up the facility for people to run around the track. Simple. Or possibly use the tennis courts. Very simple. In the grand scheme of things, probably unimportant. But the courtesy was to answer. It wasn't until I wrote back and CC'd the board that I got an answer back in about 20 minutes, saying they must have overlooked it. That's not good community relations. That combined with the feeling that they can't approach the board in public hearings. People could talk about all the time. We're going out to the community. We're going to the community. People don't see that.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. Next question. How should tense or disrespectful exchanges at a board meeting be handled? And what is your experience handling such exchanges? Mr. Huber?
Again, I think there has to be an agreement behind the scenes so that it's not displayed in front of the public. Because again, you cannot display less than a united front in front of the public because people feed on that. Yes, social media, Facebook, all these things, people love that. It's it's no secret. You cannot do that. You need to have some rules of exchange that you agree to prior going out there. You can argue and disagree and everything behind the scenes, but when you go out there, that's not the time or the place to put that show on. Some people will choose to do that because they have different gripes and different axes to grind. But if you're really in it for the right reasons, you don't do it. And you work out your issues with the other folks. You will disagree. Again, I did it all my life. You will disagree with people, but you do not air those differences.
Mr. Bihar?
I mean, I have never comported myself that way. I certainly think that every person that comes to the microphone, I know that sometimes public speaking, it can be scary to some people, and I think everyone deserves respect. And to the extent that people have maybe spoken at meetings in a way that was disrespectful, It's certainly conversations that I've had. I'm not going to call anyone out at a meeting or in person, but I certainly agree with that. For example, I didn't mean to portray Mr. Huber as a novice or say that he never attended a board meeting. I just am talking about community involvement in Commack. And so if I said that, I would very apologize. For example, Mr. Huber was very upset. He said that he didn't get a response. He did get a response within 20 minutes, and we apologized. And we told him that the track was closed because it was under construction. So these are things that you have to own, right? You shouldn't do it in the first place, I agree. But if you do, I think you apologize. I have great respect for this community, and I want to make them feel welcome.
Thank you. Next question. Commack is a diverse community, including people of varied religions, cultures, races, ethnicities, sexual identities, and sexual orientations. As a school board member, how would you ensure Commack supports the success and acceptance of all students? And where in the curriculum would you include any changes with respect to these diversity? Mr. Bihar?
Well, again, as a board member, I'm not making any curriculum decisions, right? We set goals kind of at the 50,000 foot level. And I'm very pleased that with the leadership of Trustee Varghese that we've created this committee to study that exact issue. They've been doing this work for well over a year now and are making recommendations with administrators, teachers, parents, board members in how to make our curriculum more diverse and more inclusive. Because at the end of the day, every child in Commack deserves to feel included and deserves to feel worthy because they are.
Mr. Huber?
Sure. Again, in all the experience I've had, I've actually lived with diversity. I've worked with diversity. I started upstate New York in a rural school, Roscoe, New York. For those of you who know Trouttown, USA, Roscoe. I was also down the Lower East Side in the projects in Manhattan for 8 years as a school psychologist, working with a very diverse population down there. I was in the Gold Coast of Manhasset and out in Three Village. So I've had exposure, rural, suburban, urban, suburban, rural. I've had all different types of races and religious affiliations with kids in the buildings and their families. It's what I do. It's what I've done. It's not just talk. Curriculum issues, listen, again, there's issues out there right now that are challenging. I know the Smithtown board and some other boards with the critical race theory. I don't personally believe that some of these outside political organizations should be dictating what kids should think and what they should believe. I think that is the job of the educators, not the Board of Ed. But what you allow in as a Board of Ed really should be speculative, because there are a lot of agendas that they pry on the public schools to
Thank you,
disseminate.
Mr. Huber.
Thank you. Next question. There currently are many Commack students suffering from mental health conditions. Do you feel that our curriculum includes adequate education about mental illness, the signs and symptoms, how to get help, meditation, mindfulness, how to regulate emotions, etc.? Why or why not? Mr. Huber?
I think curriculum, well, again, it runs a span. Mental illness is a continuum that, from mild to severe. I don't necessarily know if that's a classroom matter. That's, in my opinion, it's more of a support matter and recognition. It's more for faculty and training and staff development to recognize some of these issues with children in their care. And then referring to support services to kind of address that. In a mild sense, yes, mindfulness, with helping kids with anxiety. I can't tell you how many kids have anxiety. My alternative high school program are kids that are average, above average intelligence that cannot manage a bigger school because of anxiety, because of depression, because of social phobias and school anxiety and social media. It destroys children today. And I think, again, it's about creating a culture in your classroom, in your buildings, in your district, to allow them comfort to go to school and learn without being preoccupied with all this stuff. But the responsiveness and the awareness has to come from everybody. It is a community adventure, home to school, from classroom to support services to children. It is a whole kind of community reach out to make sure that these children along any different scale.
Thank you, Mr. Huber.
Thank you. Mr. Bihar?
I think that anyone that's been coming to the meetings for the last couple of years would know that what we've done is spent a lot of time adding staff to this exact issue. School psychologists, counselors, we bring them in and they work with the children. We've added the movement in the arts program, which has been very integral in getting the kids up and moving and learning all at the same time. And that's all been done with this singular focus of improving our children's mental health, which we take very, very seriously here in Commack.
Thank you. What did the district do well during the pandemic, and what flaws came to light, and how could we recover from those flaws? Mr. Bihar?
Well, listen, unfortunately, what we're getting, I think, is a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking here. What we could have done differently with the benefit of hindsight. If we lived in a district like Three Village, where they could, with all their declining enrollment, they could fit everyone in the building with 6 feet apart. Maybe you could have had a different program. We couldn't do that here. We only had space at the elementary level to do that. So that was the first priority, and I think we did that well. We got all of our elementary kids in school every day, and I think that program was a huge success. And I think almost every parent in the intermediate and primary level are happy with that. Looking back, we could have done a better job with the quarantine program right from the beginning. That should have been different. And when we learned that wasn't working, we made swift changes there. I think we should have done more for our seniors right from the beginning. These are students that got hit at the end of their junior year, and it carried right over through this entire year. And I think it was too slow to really make their year special. And we should have done more there as well.
Thank you. Mr. Huber?
Listen, again, it's not Monday morning quarterbacking. It really is the practice before the game, so that when you roll out something, it's been thoroughly discussed. Something like the quarantine issue shouldn't have been addressed in January. They were out since September and during the summer. So again, I'm not going to argue about the timelines, but it's not hindsight. It's not Monday morning quarterbacking. It's going into it prepared to understand it and walk it down before you propose it. That being said, I think Commack did a wonderful job with a lot of the program and the COVID plans. It's not an easy task. I don't envy anybody who had to make those decisions across the board, not just Commack, any school districts. And yes, some did better than others. However, there seemed to be a more conservative approach that probably limited more people. One example would be the other day was College Day, Commitment Day, May 1st. Beautiful Saturday afternoon. Why couldn't there have been something? Everybody talked about, we're going to help the seniors, help the seniors. Those kids could have been out on a field, taking pictures with their friends, with their college gear on, some little special day that wouldn't have done anything, wouldn't have cost a penny. From what I understood.
Thank you, Mr. Huber.
Thank you. Do you believe the Commack model was academically successful, and what would you have done differently, if anything, Mr. Huber?
Well, if you are looking at the bar charts, yes, it's academically successful. If you are an experienced educator and as a father, I would say absolutely not. I don't know how you put a teenager or a middle schooler or a child in an every other day type setting with no real structure, no real instruction, and tell me that's success. You may be able to put, again, the data points on a bar graph and share that with people and say, we have success. But I believe you are missing, what's the saying, the trees through the forest? Don't measure my child by a data point. What happened to those kids? There is definitely not the growth that we would have expected to see.
Mr. Bihar?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's hard to speak about this without having had a kid in the district this year. I think saying that there was no structure and no instruction is very, very insulting to our teachers who worked really, really hard. And they were an integral part in putting this plan together. It wasn't something that the administration sent down from on high. This was an unprecedented situation. And what we wanted to do is give our children, actually give them structure, give them a schedule so that they had a predictable day. And like I said, in July and August, we didn't know how long this was going to last. We might get shifted to all remote on a moment's notice. And we wanted to set them up for success then. With the benefit of hindsight, we made it through the whole year, and that's great. But we cared about it. We cared about their safety. We cared about the ability to be consistent, to at least give them something so they knew every day where they were going to be. They knew their core classes were going to be taught in school by our teachers in their presence. And I think that that was very important. And to say otherwise is just wrong.
If we are unable to open schools fully in the fall in person 5 days a week, how does the district ensure a high quality education, whether students are hybrid or remote or hybrid or remote? And do you support live streaming of classes? Mr. Bihar?
Well, next year we are on pace for a full opening. So I think that that question is largely talking about something that there's almost no chance of happening, especially now that pretty much everyone is vaccinated. They're opening it up for younger children. So we are looking full steam ahead towards a full opening, and that, you know, every child that wants to be in school is going to be in school 5 days a week. Look, at the end of the day, there are things that we could learn about this program. And I think that we all expect that this type of pandemic environment likely won't happen again. So looking back on what happened and what went wrong is largely, unfortunately, irrelevant at this point. What we can do is move forward and see what can we do to help our kids with that transition, the mental health supports, the tutoring, the things that I've talked about that have already been put in place by the district, and then moving forward with a full opening next year. And I do expect that there will be an element of live streaming for kids that can't come to school.
Mr. Huber?
Again, with a sense of cautiousness, promising everybody a live opening could or may not happen. Most districts open up with the sense that we're going into next year starting in a COVID-like model. A lot of people are not using the 3-foot issue because, again, the Department of Health is still talking about, we do contact tracing. So if you have kids 3 feet apart, right? One of those children is COVID positive. Guess what? When the Department of Health finds that out and does a contact tracing, all of those kids within a radius, because it's a duration of 10 minutes or more within 6 feet. So you could essentially put more kids out on a quarantine because you're not following the 6 feet. And the double-edged sword is if you do follow the 6-foot limit, you won't be able to bring everybody back. So again, some thought has to go into the model before we just say, oh, we're bringing everybody back. And again, that might be motivated by some of the concerns from this year, but it has to be thoughtful and it has to be walked down the road because there still are parameters for education that may or may not allow us to do the things we really want to do. So think about those.
Thank you. Next question. Do you support the proposed school budget, Mr. Huber?
I do. I absolutely do. I think it's fair. I think it's reasonable. I do know that every given year, people will be out there picking apart line by line. I don't subscribe to that kind of thinking in its whole form. And again, the budget is largely increased by contracts that we need in the district. That's even service contracts and other types of things we do, but also personnel, staff, personnel. And those things aren't any secrets. It is a people organization. The largest part of your spending is people. Take them out of the equation, you don't have schools, you don't have happy people, it doesn't work. So people can be angry about budgets, but for the most part, if you look at that budget and you compare it to other budgets, it's fair, it's a reasonable budget, and I really don't have any concern with it.
Mr. Bihar?
Sorry. Yes, yeah, I voted for the budget, so I guess I better support it. Listen, we were so thrilled that we got extra funding from the state. We got $1.5 million that is separate from the federal money that has to be used for programming. And we took every penny of that money and applied it to the tax levy to reduce it for our community that's been through so much this year. So we had originally proposed a 1.99% tax levy. We took that $1.5 million, which is roughly equivalent to a 1% tax levy in Commack, and we peeled that one right off the tax levy increase, and we're down to a 0.99%, which is, if not the lowest, among the lowest in the surrounding area. So I'm very excited that we could do that for our community, coupled with going back full time and all the supports that we're putting in place universal pre-K for everyone, free Cougar Camp over the summer. I mean, it really is a fantastic budget. There's so much there literally for every child in Commack, and I just think it's a win for the community.
Thank you. If necessary, where would you cut the school budget, and what do you consider off limits to budget cuts, and why? Mr. Bihar?
Well, listen, fortunately, we don't have to cut the budget. We have a great budget for next year that has a very low tax increase. Now, if people vote no for the budget, we're going to have to cut $5 million out. And that's called going on an austerity budget. We're going to have to increase class sizes. We're going to have to make tough decisions about cutting programs. Outside community organizations that use our schools, instead of getting them for free as nonprofits, will have to pay for them. So think about that. All the people that missed the Commack Basketball Association this year because they couldn't use our schools because of the COVID restrictions we got from the state, they won't be able to do that again next year. I mean, there are kids in our community that are just underserved for activities because we actually couldn't let them use our facilities because of the state. All of that will go away. So some hard choices would have to be made next year if this budget doesn't pass. Fortunately, we have been benefited by the community's overwhelming support of our budget in recent years, and I don't think that will happen.
Mr. Huber?
Listen, the idea of voting down budgets today is not the same principle as voting them down in years past. Like years past, when I first started, you had budgets, 10%, 7%, 6% increases for the taxpayers. That was unheard of. The whole 2% tax cap over the years has really allowed districts to manage finances within means so that the community really supports them. A community like Commack, I can't even see them voting down a budget of this type. And to do so would really hurt the children. So these other things don't go away. It's just impossible to take away. It will hurt children. So again, I don't believe that type of population is that big and that active here in Commack. It shouldn't be. You are privileged, and I'll use that word privileged, to be part of a community that attends some really great schools with some really great teachers and some really great administrators. I had the experience for my own children, and I would never vote it down for reasons of simply being angry. It's not reasonable to vote it down. So if you would, oh, sorry.
Thank you. What is your position on and vision for the LIU Marion Carl Farm, and why? Mr. Huber?
I think, it's been a longstanding issue and people have wondered about what's going on with there. It's wonderful that it's going to be for educational purposes. It's wonderful that it actually is going to be connected with a college. I think kids need to see those connections more and more. We're privileged out east to be connected in the shadows of Stony Brook, and we have a lot of things going on with them. I just think that is something that's really enriching for kids. The idea of veterinary medicine, maybe it opens up another whole career path for a lot of kids that we maybe never would have had if we didn't have this venture. So, and just the preservation of it. There is a means and a need to preserve it, but to be able to balance it all like the board did, and kudos to them for doing so, it's a wonderful addition to the community. So that's my feeling on that.
Thank you. Mr. Bihar?
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate all the compliments I've been getting kind of secondhand from this Mr. Huber. I mean, this was my something that I worked very hard on. And, I felt very strongly that the property needed to be preserved, but in a way that took it off the hands of the taxpayer. And we were able to make that happen, not just in a way that really improved the property, but now has created all these co-curricular activities for our students. And I've heard from so many people whose kids are just so excited to get some of these veterinary programs. So, look, I agree with a lot of the things Mr. Huber has said. I think Commack schools have always been wonderful. I've been a large part of that for the last 6 years. I think the Marion Carl plan is fantastic. That was something that I worked really hard on with a lot of involved and dedicated community members to make happen. And I think that what's more than a home run? It was more than a grand slam. It was like hitting a grand slam and coming back and hitting another one. So literally going to be a great opportunity for our community with this.
Thank you. What is your position on opting out of state tests, Mr. Bihar?
I think I'm in favor of every parent's right to choose whether or not they want to opt their children out of the state tests or not. I think that there have been historically a lot of problems with the state tests. They haven't been developed by educators. They don't really have a lot of value, which is part of the reason over the last few years we've developed our own models here in Commack so that we can accurately gauge our students' performance and how to improve it. Dr. James was at the forefront of getting us away from Common Core. I mean, you came to these board meetings when I first started out, and that was the fight, right? Common Core, the state tests, they were tied to teacher evaluations, which they never should have been tied to teacher evaluations. We need local control for those things. So it's all part of this privatization of education, move towards charter schools, trying to take funding away from public education. And we have to be strong. And part of being strong on that issue is preserving a parent's right to opt out from those tests.
Mr. Huber?
Again, I don't really think a district like Commack requires state tests. I think there are so many different qualified people throughout the year that can assess the children as to where they're going. I agree again with Mr. Bihar about using tests to evaluate teacher performance. Again, as a principal, I find that awkward because a lot of these local plans to use assessments were fairly arbitrary. And again, you know who are good teachers, who are not. Families in this community know when their child's struggling. They know how to access resources. They know how to get individualized assessments for those children. So the larger group to sit through those exams for the sake of the state gathering data. And again, that data means nothing now because again, I coordinate the 3 through 8 testing program for 3 Village. And I used to have a minivan follow me, you know, with all the boxes of tests to go to BOCES and log them all in, right? To scan them. Now I put them in the trunk of my car because there's really, that's how big the opt-out movement has grown. And again, when you have 50% or so, or even larger in certain areas of kids opting out, what value is it for a child? And probably, you know, you look at parent advocacy, it's wonderful because they're getting it. You don't need those measures to evaluate how well your kid's doing or how well your teachers
Mr.
is doing,
Huber.
how well your school is doing.
Thank you. In your opinion, what has the district done well over the past 3 years, and what has the district done not so well? And what would you do to improve the latter? Mr. Huber?
I think the course offerings with the kids is fabulous. Again, my own 3 who recently, you know, within the last few years went through the high school program. They do a fantastic job of preparing kids for college. The IB offerings, the AP offering, like it really is a wonderful track for kids to embrace. It could be daunting at times. A lot of writing is the concern, but I wouldn't have traded their experience for anything. And kudos again to the high school administration and the teachers up there because they really are doing a fantastic job and getting kids ready for college.
Mr. Bihar?
So I think one of the things that we've done really well over the last few years is we've gotten away from this every kid needs to go to college mentality, and something that the board has really pushed and the superintendent has embraced is a shift to college and career readiness. So some kids don't necessarily have college in their future. They want to go into a trade. They want to learn how to do Cisco networking. And these are a big shift that the district took away from that and towards college and career readiness. And I think that that's been a really important step. And that has also assisted with the mental health of our students, not feeling like they're being forced to go to college when then that might not be the right path to them. And then mental health support has been fantastic in terms of this district. Expanding that, like I mentioned before, adding staff, movement in the arts has been great. I think we've done a good job improving our communications with the teachers and with the community. And you know, just respecting individuality overall, which is just a really important thing we need in this district.
Thank you. Last question. What are your hopes for the future of this school district, and how would your aspirations help our students? Mr. Bihar?
You know, what I hope is that we get more community involvement. I really want to hear from more people. Most board meetings, we really have no one there. For the first few board meetings of the year, we had no one there. You know, I applaud Mr. Huber for wanting to get involved. There's a ton of opportunities in this district to get involved. It's not just starting with the Board of Education. I would love to see him there, love to see other people like him get involved, because it's that diversity of opinion, holding space for difference that really makes us grow and makes us better. And that piece of it, I would really love to see. Our voter turnout is low. We really need that community opinion, especially in Commack, which is becoming more diverse every year. And we need to embrace that diversity and really allow us to move forward in a positive manner.
Mr. Huber?
Listen, one of my priorities, if I were on the board, again, the model that I use right now, the program that I'm in charge of right now, it's an alternative high school program. I've had inquiries from Commack about it, looking to send kids to it. I'd love to expand the offerings outside of what we have right now in Commack. And again, we offer a lot. So it's just another niche that somehow it doesn't get filled. It doesn't necessarily require placement out of the district. It doesn't necessarily mean the kid has to struggle in the larger school settings. I'd love to see that. And again, I would love to see more faith in transparency, which seems to be the biggest concern right now. And again, people who have been on the board and are in district leadership, again, it's a great district, and maybe that's why we don't get the involvement. But sometimes I think there's a feeling out there that some of this stuff is falling on deaf ears. And that cannot be the dynamic that is transmitted by the board or the district leadership.
Thank you. And that's the end of our question and answer period. And now we're going into closing remarks. Mr. Huber, you have 2 minutes to provide your remarks.
Sure. I am not as steeped in some of the bullet items that Mr. Bihar has listed. And again, it's great that he is involved, and I can admire that over the years. But don't underestimate the experience I do have. Again, I've been in buildings, I've walked the walk for many, many years. I've worked with parents, with Board of Educations, with political people, with children of special needs, superintendents, assistants, chair people, curriculum matters, busing matter. Like, I've done a lot of things, and I think I have a wealth of experience that I can bring to Commack, and I'd like to bring it to Commack. No secret, I'm going to be retiring soon. I'm looking to be connected to the community. I always was with my children. Them being at college and not having kids in school, not participating in sports programs, that was our involvement. That was our life that my wife and I created for our kids and our community, in our home here in the community. So I want to get back involved. It's only been, less than a year that my daughter left, and we feel kind of there's a vacancy. If you asked me 6 months ago, would I have run for the Board of Education, I would have said, I do it for a living. I kind of like to do other things. But in light of, it may have started out as a jest, like, oh, Gus, why don't you run for the Board of Education? You'd be great at it. As it gained ground and I'm listening, I really think, like, you know what, I can galvanize some of that hostility. It's not good to have it there. And if people looking to me to make a decision for them and help them be heard, great, I'll offer that. Again, I'm not anti anything. I'm pro Gus and I'm pro education. And if I can communicate that to people and in the board and influence change that they'd like to see, I'll be more than happy to play that role as the facilitator of that people. There is a growing frustration with the current members, and not all, and I'm not pinpointing anybody, but if people like the way things are going, keep going. Again, this was a trying year. So to throw the baby in the bathwater out, I don't know if that's necessarily okay, but when things are good in Commack. When things are bad, you expect better leadership. You expect more thought and provoking conversations about education, about children, about families.
Thank you, Mr. Huber.
It's not going to go away.
Thank you. Mr. Bihar, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, there's not a vacancy here. I mean, Mr. Huber just said he's pro Gus. He said he's running for me. I'm here for the community, okay? To paraphrase Teddy Roosevelt, it's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. Where the doer of deeds could have done them better, the credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena. I've been the man in the arena for the last 10 years. This job is about putting in the time. You have to be committed. You have to be invested. Community members want their voices heard. That can be done in a variety of ways. The simplest way is just by showing up and voting. Something, by the way, Mr. Huber has failed to do since 2016 until the district paid for his postage. He's an educator. He should know better and vote in our elections. Those that come to our meetings and speak, sometimes they praise, sometimes they offer constructive criticism. Mr. Huber has done none of that. I've been the man in the arena, but I haven't been there alone. We have a tremendous community of givers and helpers, parents and educators, all working together towards the common goal of schools that work for our children. This is a volunteer position, taking time away from family, friends, and career. I've spent countless hours at board meetings, serving on committees, coaching sports, and just talking to people in the community. I've taken action and I've gotten things done. And I believe truly that Commack is a better place for my efforts. And I believe that Mr. Huber thinks that too, because he said our schools are wonderful. And with your support, I will continue the important work that still needs to be done. I am a proud member of this community. My wife and I are blessed to raise our children in a neighborhood that truly cares. Molly and Jeffrey have reaped the benefits of attending school in a district that strives for excellence. And with the input of our community, we continue to improve. To move forward, we need to start by putting one foot in front of the other. And I'm proud to be walking alongside all of you, my friends and neighbors. It will be an honor to continue to represent this community. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you both, Mr. Huber and Mr. Behar, for joining us tonight. I appreciate you both taking the time to answer these questions. And I wanted to thank the community for tuning in and helping us create this event by providing your questions. And please, please go vote on May 18th.
Vote, yes, please.
And with that, I will wish everyone a good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you very much for this.
Have a good night.